The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
Good morning or good evening, I'm Joe Doolittle.
And I'm Kate Dudding.
And this is Story by Story.
Celebrating the human spirit.
With the emphasis on celebrating today.
Yes.
I think we sometimes just go right through the title, but I think celebrating is a good thing to think about. Because here, it's been summer. Mm-hmm. We've been celebrating like the 4th of July.
Yes.
And Bastille Day. And coming up will be Labor Day. Mm-hmm. And if there's one thing we ought to celebrate, it's probably work. No, that doesn't work.
Well, having work you want to do and accomplishing it.
A vocation, as it were.
As it were. And having enough work to pay for what you need to pay for, like shelter and food, that's good too.
That's good too. And fortunately, you and I both did other things for work, so we can share our vocation of storytelling.
Yes.
And it's not that storytellers don't get paid, it's just that you don't make as much as you do doing other things sometimes.
Most artists are in that category.
And what we're going to do with you for the next hour is we're going to talk a little bit about the art and the method of storytelling. Mm-hmm. We're going to talk about some things that are going on in the local community, in the storytelling world, performance-wise and learning-wise. And then we're going to have a guest storyteller, and we're going to hear a couple of great stories. And our theme is celebrating, and it's also celebrating our Irish heritage. Mm-hmm. We've got a lot going on with that this month, starting with Shawnee Evenings at the Irish American Heritage Museum. And then we've got another really neat program at Proctor's coming up on how are things in Glockamora. So you may think that March is the month for Irish storytelling and culture. Well, actually, it can be almost any time.
Well, yes, of course, that you're not just Irish 1 month a year. And
actually, Kate, I'm not Irish
at all
any month of the year, but I'm an Irish wannabe. Yes.
Okay. No, I'm quarter Irish, quarter Scottish, some Pennsylvania Dutch, which is not really well defined.
Pennsylvania Dutch have that tendency not to be well defined, I think.
Yes.
But, hey, what's the most interesting thing that's been doing in your life of storytelling this summer?
Well, it has to be going to the National Storytelling Conference this year in Kansas City and meeting up with 200 colleagues from around the country. And let's see, there was somebody there from Australia, as I recall, and hearing some fabulous stories, going to some wonderful workshops, and finally getting an insight into story slams and why they're important.
What, pray tell, is a story slam?
It's an open competition. Usually it's personal stories, no more than 5 minutes long. People have maybe less than a month to come up with a story to fit the topic.
Ooh.
That's generally the kind of thing it is. The Moth is an example. Some of the slams, the people just come in off the street and have had no training. So it's a very open mic kind of thing.
Wow.
And when they first came on board, the professional storytellers often were not happy with this.
With these amateur things.
These amateur things. Storytelling is such an unknown art form, and they were appalled that some people would be introduced to the art form by these amateurs who were doing a very poor job of telling their stories.
Is there usually a winner of a storytelling slam?
Yes, and there's a winner. And that was also well, you can't compare us. I mean, it's like comparing apples and aardvarks, you know.
So if there's a winner of a storytelling slam, even though you're an amateur, you must be pretty good.
Yes.
Ah.
You know, so some slams in there's a whole series in Arizona that was started up by the largest newspaper there, but they do coaching. That people call in, and the newspaper reporter in charge makes sure that the people have processed their what's going on in their personal story. If it's a personal story about a death of a loved one, you shouldn't be telling it if you can't tell it if you're always crying during it. According to the professional storyteller, that way you are abusing your audience, making them into your therapy.
So this isn't therapy, this is storytelling.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So in Arizona, they made sure that you were through processing it, and then they went to coaches. Excuse me. So it was a curated story slam, if you will. So anyways, so this schism has existed now for 10 years. And I've finally had a little insight from something I heard there, that these people, these amateur storytellers, they do have a voice, they do have a story, they do deserve to be heard. They just need to be labeled as amateur so that people understand that there's a whole spectrum of storytellers, and that you can expect professional storytellers to present their stories in a more polished format.
And we don't have a story slam here in the Capital District, do we? We have open mics.
Well, there is one. There used to be two, but the woman who was organizing the one in Troy is moving away. So I'm not sure that's going to continue. But there's one in Quackenbush Square.
That's right.
And
that's on our website if people want to know about it.
No, not usually, because they don't announce things. They only announce things like 2 weeks ahead of time, and that doesn't fit my schedule of publishing things.
Oh, okay.
So
stay tuned, because maybe we'll think about trying to offer one of those.
No, Joe, no. We do too much. Oh, sorry. Yes.
That was a little bit of inside little conversation we just had.
Yes.
But at any rate, we'll look at for some of those things, and we do have open mics in Schenectady and Saratoga Springs, which we'll talk about a little bit later, that provide some of the same opportunity if you want to tell a story.
And what about in your world in storytelling?
Well, I've had the opportunity to preach twice in this summer. Once up at the Unitarian Church in Saratoga with our old friend Alan Bartenhagen invitation, and that was just a delightful time. I preached on 3 stories of coincidence, which coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous. That was the crossover to organized religion, and I had a wonderful time, and I found a great bar. I mean, I got to tell you. No, this one I'm gonna be a free commercial.
Story by story, bar by bar.
Or ice cream parlor. It's called The Local on the Lake, and it's down on the corner of 9P, where the 9P bridge goes over Fish Creek. On the right, The Local is a very nice pub in Saratoga on the west side. They've opened up a satellite on the lake, and it is just delightful. They got a beach, they got docks, they got Adirondack chairs, and you can have a great burger and a draft beer and a view of the water, and it doesn't get much better than that. So there you go.
There you go.
So that was my high point. That was my epiphany right there at the juncture of Saratoga Lake and Fish Creek.
Most people don't start by talking about preaching and end up in a bar.
Well, it was a Unitarian church.
Oh. They set the bar low? Moving right along.
No. We're gonna. I think we need a rescue right here of serious talk about storytelling, and we're joined by one of our favorite storytellers, also from Saratoga Springs, Betty Cassidy. Betty Cassidy, it's so nice to have you here today.
Thank you. It's nice to be here, and especially if we were talking about Irish, it's nice to have someone named Cassidy here.
Yeah.
That's true. Kate is always thinking ahead.
Yes.
Always thinking
Well,
ahead.
my grandmother was a Kylie, and
Kylie.
her grandmother was a Shaughnessy. So I wasn't just fooling about Irish.
Now, Cassidy is your married name.
Yes, I have to admit, I'm Irish, but Northern Irish.
Whoa! You have an orange tint to you.
Yes, my parents
Oh.
were Canadian and became American citizens.
Okay.
Way a long time ago when I was very young. And I had Joe's discussion about the local on the lake is accurate, and I also heard his sermon, which was wonderful.
We had fun.
Wonderful.
We had fun. Yeah, I have a member of this church, and I, Bruce Goodale, was there. We have the same birthday, which was the 27th of June, and the service was on the 26th. So Bruce and I and some other friends went out to the local to celebrate our birthdays.
Oh, good.
So that made it even better. But
Good.
yeah, but thanks for coming to that service. That was
Well, I had never been to a Unitarian service I guess I'd been years ago in Schenectady, and I had never been to this particular one, and I'd always said, it's one of those things I'll do one of these days, and I saw, well, why not do it now, because they've got this star giving the sermon, and I went in, and it was so exciting because I ran into a fellow I used to share an office with at work. I was moved away and back for the summer, and then I heard Joe's sermon, and I must say I've given a lot of thought to coincidences since then.
It's one of those wonderful points of reflection, because when you certainly think back at anybody's life, there are those things that have happened that have changed things.
And what if?
What if?
What if?
And so if you're out there listening, you want a little fun time, just think about some of those coincidences and what happened if you had gone the other way at that turn in the road. Because as Robert Frost says, I went the road less traveled, and it's made all the difference. So it was a fun thing to put together. It was really good. Now, career-wise, you've been storytelling about
10 years, I guess.
10 years.
10 years.
And before that, you were a librarian. No,
I was a teacher, English teacher at the community college.
right up at Adirondack.
SUNY Adirondack, it's called now. It used to be ACC, Adirondack Community College. When I left, they changed the name.
So you couldn't find your way back?
That happens. My GPS was all messed up. Right?
Yes. Where I taught English and public speaking and other courses, but that was where I went to one of Janine Laverty's free workshops at the Saratoga Library because I was looking for some way to liven up the public speaking class and talk about doing more stories as far as persuasive speaking and how effective it was. So I took that course, and the next year or two, a couple of years after that, I retired, and I retired from the teaching part and still do workshops once in a while and things like that, but stayed very interested in storytelling thanks to the groups that you two have that provide us places and audiences and so forth.
Well,
My storytelling started with that free workshop in March, or February or March, at Saratoga Springs Public Library.
Yes.
4 sessions. And I came wanting to tell a personal story that my best friend had been killed in an automobile accident 18 months before. And I wanted to tell a story about her that was different than the one that I told at her memorial service. I knew I wasn't ready to tell that to a public audience. And so she said, now I'd like you all to tell a folk tale, because those are stories that have been polished over the centuries, and just the essential information is there. And I said, but I want to tell a personal story. She said, well, that'll make a nice difference.
Oh, and she let you do it.
Yes,
oh,
she
good.
did. Bless her heart.
Good.
So, anyways.
every story has a story. I don't mean to sound redundant on that, but a lot of us come to stories with the story of the story. So I'm curious, when you went back to the classroom after that workshop, what was different in that speaking class for the students? What did you do different?
Well, I felt more secure about telling them the value of storytelling, and explaining to them how we're all full of stories, and we're influenced by stories every time we hear an advertisement, and or a political speech or something like that. So it was. I added to it. I think I made it a better class.
So I heard you validated the method, and then actually could encourage them to pull a story out of their own quiver, so to speak.
And recognize stories when, by coincidence, they tripped over them.
That's really good.
Well, and I think, if I've got a minute, what the thing recently that has brought this forth is that Margaret French, another wonderful storyteller, and I got a grant a couple of years ago to do a storytelling program through the Crandall Library System. And we've done 2, 3, 4 now, 4-day workshops at various places for adults. They just have time to develop a family story or a personal story, and at the last date, someone from the library comes in and videotapes them telling that story. And I have never seen people so eager and so happy to have a place to tell their stories. They didn't know how good it was. And I didn't know. I said to Margaret, every day of teaching had been like this. Everybody told us we were wonderful every week.
Wow.
But it was because they were so thrilled by these stories.
So you do a series over 4 weeks where people kind of perfect the story, then they have a performance and they get a video of themselves telling the story?
Yes.
Whoa!
And so that joy of being able to tell their stories, that goes back to my slam, and I'm going to be working with someone who's on the slam side of trying to bring these two factions in the storytelling world together to appreciate and then somehow distinguish. But letting people tell their stories is really powerful.
Yes, and as you said, they have to be careful that they're ready to tell some of these powerful stories. So,
you know, it strikes me that there'd be a fair amount of interest, and that's a great way of introducing storytelling to communities.
Oh, some of them have come to our Cafe Lena things after, and other programs. And tell stories.
Story Circle in Salem.
Yes.
Some of the people there were trained by Betty.
Yes.
That's really interesting. We ought to talk, because you know there used to be the Riverway Storytelling Festival with the Library Association, and perhaps if we could get a cadre of folks that could go out and do this in various library communities, it would be a service for us, and it would be a service for them, and it would help get the storytelling world out there. But that's not another thing we can do. I know that.
You have much more energy, or I'm barely hanging in there with what I have commitments.
I know. But this is a really good idea, and it's kind of been piloted, so we have to think about how to do it. You know, we've been talking a lot about story, and we'd like to hear a story. If you've got one. Did you bring a story today?
I brought a story.
Oh, good.
All right. This first story is a folk tale, and it's called The $100 Bill. Back in the Old West, there were large ranches. One of them was in Texas, where Mr. McCabe owned a huge amount of land, and he had cattle, and he had horses, and he had crops and everything else. What he didn't have enough of was good helpers. He needed to hire another cowboy or two who really knew what he was doing. He really knew how to take care of the animals, mend the fences, handle anything that came along. And one day, along to his house, knocking on the door, came a guy named Charlie. Charlie had lived in other parts of the West, but he had just gotten to Texas, and he'd heard that Mr. McCabe needed another hand. So he got hired. After an intensive interview with Mr. McCabe, he got hired, and it turned out that Charlie was the best possible cowboy he had ever hired. He knew how to take care of the animals, how to tell when the cows needed extra help, or what horse was in trouble, or what fence needed fixing, and he got along with all the other workers. Everybody liked him. So Mr. McCabe was so thrilled after a while watching this that he called him in and said, "Charlie, I'm going to make you in charge. You're like my first person next to me. You are in charge of all of the hiring, firing, taking care of things, and scheduling things on this ranch. And do you think you can do it?" And Charlie said, "Sure, yes I can." And he could. He really did a wonderful job, and Mr. McCabe was thrilled with it. Gave him a raise, gave him a little more free time. It was working out very well. But then the summer came, and there was a drought. It didn't rain for week after week after week after week. The cattle were getting thin as there was less and less food for them. Things were drying up, and Mr. McCabe called Charlie in and said, "Charlie, we don't usually sell the cattle this fast, this early in the season, but we got to get rid of them now before they die out of starvation. I want you to get your men ready, and I want you to take those cattle into town and sell them. Get the best price you can. I know it's hard to ask for it now. It's hot, and it's extra work for you." "That's all right," said Charlie. "I like to get away once in a while, even if it is with 50 or 60 cows." And they went, he and 4 of the other cowboys and their horses, got these cattle and got them into town. It took a day and a half to do it. And then Charlie had to spend the rest of that day talking to the auctioneers, bargaining with them, back and forth as to how much money they get. And when he finally reached an agreement that he thought Mr. McCabe would be happy with, he said, "All right." And they went back then, the cowboys, to the hotel where they were staying. It wasn't really a hotel. It was like a boarding house. It was Miss Sally's, where she had rooms upstairs and a bar room downstairs and a dance hall. And all the cowboys stopped there because it was good. The food was good. The place was good. So Charlie said to the cowboys, "Now, you've worked very hard the last couple days. Let's just have a little party tonight." Well, they had more than a little party. And the next morning, Charlie looked in the bar room and said, oh, look at this. There was a mirror broken. A leg was off one of the chairs. Things had spilled. Beer looked like beer had spilled in lots of places. And Miss Sally was just sort of standing there thinking, oh, this is going to take a lot of work. And Charlie went up and thanked her and said, "I'm sorry. The boys got a little wild last night, but this is such a fun place for them. And here," and he reached in his pocket and he handed her a $100 bill. He said, "This will cover our bill and extra for cleaning up." And she said, "Oh, thank you so much." And she said goodbye to them, and they left to go back to the ranch. And in the meantime, Miss Sally took this $100 bill and she ran next door to the general store and she gave it to the owner, Mr. Perkins, there, and said, "Here, you have been so good about letting me charge food this summer. When the business has been so bad, I finally got some money to pay you." And she took the $100 bill, or he took it, and said, "Thank you, Miss Sally." And as soon as she left, he went next door to the funeral home. And he said to the man there, "John, I want to thank you. Remember my uncle died 3 months ago? You gave him the most wonderful funeral, just what we all wanted for him. And we couldn't afford to pay it all then, so here." And he got that $100 bill. Well, that $100 bill then next went to the livery stable, which kept all of John's black horses that he used to drive the black hearses when someone died. And then, amazingly enough, it went back to Mr. McCabe, because the liveryman bought all of the food for his horses from Mr. McCabe's ranch. So back on the ranch, Charlie was reporting to Mr. McCabe, and he was delighted with the money that Charlie had been able to get and the fact that they had done so well. And he said, Charlie, I want to give you a little special something for all this work. And he gave him that $100 bill. And he said, but Charlie, I've got a favor to ask of you. There's a big storm coming up, and I'm worried about our horses out in that back pasture. They sometimes get upset if there's a lot of lightning. I need someone to go out there and stay all night and make sure they'll be all right. Well, I can do that, said Charlie. Well, you've just come off this other trip. I hate to ask you. It's all right. It's all right. So Charlie got on his horse, and he went out to the back pasture. He found a place to put his sleeping bag down, started a little fire, put his pot of stew on it to heat it up for his meal, had tied up his horse so everything was ready. It was just getting dusk. And some of the stars were beginning to come out, and Charlie was just sitting there enjoying the scenery, thinking about the last couple days, when he reached in his pocket and he took out this $100 bill. And he threw it into the fire, a $100 bill in the fire, and charred pieces of it were coming up from the fire and drifting away. Charlie watched them go, and he said, that bill's certainly been around today. Nobody even noticed. It was counterfeit. And that's the story of the $100 bill.
Very nice. Very nice.
That's not where I thought you were going.
That's a fun one to tell.
That's not where I thought you were going.
Where did you think I was going?
I thought Charlie was going to get run over in a stampede or something like that. I was going to be, kind of, the old cowpoke was going to hang it up. And everybody's going to be sad.
That's another story, maybe.
So where did you run across this story?
I found it. I've got several books of, I can't remember the author's names, but they have those thick books, Mooney and somebody that have stories. And them and then one time somebody was giving away, Janine or somebody was giving away old magazines from various things, and in one of those things I saw it.
Right, okay, because I knew of its source. Fran Stallings had published it in the Storytelling magazine.
Yes. And I
12, 15 years ago.
The first time I did that, I contacted her, and so that was her story, but I've never seen it elsewhere. So
right, that's why I was asking.
Yeah.
Because she really wasn't clear on the source of it, and okay. Yeah. And Fran Stallings was one of the storytellers that saw at the National Storytelling Conference. She's from Arizona.
It said something about the trust we put in currency. Because
can solve everything.
Well, but people didn't look. They trusted in the value and the whatever they saw, and actually passed it on, and those kinds of things. And then to have it be counterfeit because.
But it's served. I've never taken a course in economics, and so it always baffles my mind. IOU. All these IOUs were sort of canceled based on nothing.
Well, and what does it say about Charlie having the counterfeit $100 bill in his pocket?
We don't know.
Where's the moral of that story, don't you think?
Well,
I don't know.
Well, we can't solve that right now, I don't think.
I could add to that story, though, now.
Thank you. Might be if he throws it in the fire, he's decided he wasn't going to use it again.
Or we could say a little bit more about where Charlie came from.
That's true. That's true.
If he got it back, maybe he thought this was a signal that he shouldn't play that game again. That coincidence.
And one other thing about the story, you've got a build-up of this personality, so you kind of have an appreciation for who Charlie is, who Mr. McCabe is, and maybe even the boarding house lady. And then there's a twist, and every good story would have a little twist like that. So you've given us a fine example. Thank you very much for that. Say, Kate, do we have any up-and-coming storytelling
Oh my
things that we
goodness,
should
we have
tell
a
people about?
plethora of,
A plethora.
yes.
Plethora. Boy, that's a
Almost like
great
every
word.
third day there's something. Starting with the first Tuesday Tales and Stuff on September 6th at, most likely, Arthur's Market and Historic Coffee House
Right in the Stockade in Schenectady.
that you organize. And the guests will be Mary Murphy and Barbara Palumbo. 2 of the 4 stories high.
That's right, half a story.
Half
Half
the
a
house.
story. Half a-
And then on Wednesday, September 14th, the Saratoga Storytelling Open Mic will happen. We're not quite sure where.
Well, that's right, because Cafe Lena's under construction.
Right.
Renovation. Oh, wow.
But on their calendar, they found places for the poetry open mic and something or other, and they're working on a place for the storytelling open mic. So check the calendar on cafelena.org for where it's going to be on Wednesday, September 14th. It sounds like we're flakes. We have
No, but actually, I'm going to go lobby for the local on the lake, and maybe we could. Oh, no.
Then it's Saugerties, storytelling with Janet Carter at the Inquiring Minds bookstore on the 3rd Friday of the month. That's September 16th, where the guest teller will be our teacher, Janine Laverty.
Oh, good.
It's going to be done.
And then we're opening our 10th season at Proctor's, we being Story Circle at Proctor's, with How Are Things in Glockamora. And one of the tellers, two of the 5 tellers are with us today, Betty and myself, joined by Claire Beetlestone, Fran Berger, and Margaret French. September 18th, 2 p.m., Fenimore Gallery, which is on the 2nd floor of Proctor's, above the box office. And that I realized I skipped right over Shawnee evenings on the 2nd Friday of the month, which is September 9th this year. Is that, tell us more.
It's Barbara McCarthy and Frank Orsini.
Okay. And this is at the Irish American Heritage Museum in Albany on Broadway.
Right, but I think we might be doing that one at the Capitol Rep, because their play Mulligar is Irish, and we're working together to promote the Irishness of storytelling and drama. So stay tuned on that one.
Another storytelling sounds like a floating
Like
crack
I
game.
said, stories have stories.
But definitely for sure, on Tuesday the 20th is the next meeting of Story Circle right here in Colonie Town Library.
And if you think about wanting to tell a story, that's a good thing to do, is to show up. It's free, and we have a kind of a little process for people to get feedback on their stories. And we
Including
welcome
none, if you just want to try it out. And we do start off with appreciations. So people will say, "Oh, I really like that part where you described the $100 bill, shards of it floating up and then drifting away. That took me out to to a campfire from all those John Wayne movies." Okay. And then we're doing up in Salem at the Fort Salem Theater. We're at our 3rd season there. We have a fall season that runs there. And that name of that program is A Touch of Blarney. So another Irish program with a whole different cast of tellers. Marnie Gillard, Kelvin Correga, Mary Murphy, Nancy Marie Payne, and Evan Tublitz, a local teller that the host there, Siri Allison, has found.
Good.
So,
And that's a wonderful place to listen. That's a small, intimate cafe-like place is part of the theater, not in the big theater. So if you want a great Sunday afternoon, that's a great place to make a destination and get entertained, and they even have cookies and punch afterwards.
Yes. And that's all I know about Joe. But do you have something up your sleeve?
I'm wearing short sleeves, so I'm really a little bit desperate here for other ideas. No, I don't.
Okay.
I can't think of anything. Except I always like people to know about our website and our YouTube collection at storycircle@proctors.org. If you click on the YouTube link, we've got a whole bunch.
Over 150 stories.
That's a whole bunch of stories that have been edited from the guest tellers who have been on this program. And they're organized alphabetically, and they're also organized topically. So when TV is dull, God forbid I should say that, but...
well, right now during the Olympics, it's not quite as dull as it usually is.
But anyway, check that out. You'll find it very interesting, I think, and entertaining. Wow.
Okay.
Well,
so that's what's coming up in September.
And we'll have more as the season unfolds. So stay tuned and join us for one of those along the way.
Most of those are monthly events, September through June.
Right.
So monthly or every other month.
Betty, have you got another story?
I do.
Aren't we lucky? Aren't we lucky?
That is not a coincidence, Joe. We tell her. Please bring 2 stories, about 20 minutes total. Could be more, could be less.
I do what I was told, usually.
I just always like to be surprised. I'm sorry.
Okay, this story came from an article I saw in the Archives magazine from the Albany Historical Association, I think. And it caught my attention, as I like to tell stories sometimes that have an historical background or truth and about things that really happened, and sort of, so what? Why is this interesting? So that's this story, and it's called, what was the name I gave it? The Woman Behind the Glass, okay? The year is 1888, and Clara Wolcott, a young woman in her mid-20s, was rushing to get to an interview. She got to the building, and it was called the Glass and Decorating Company. And so she went in, sat outside the door waiting to be interviewed, and the door opened and this man came out and said, "How do you do? My name is Tiffany. Come on in and I'll interview you." So he did. He interviewed her, and he spent a long time at it. Because you see, Clara was an unusual person, a young woman in those days. She had just graduated from art school in New York City. And she was single. She had the talent, and she was single, so she could be hired, because married women in those days were never hired for anything much, because they'd be taking a job away from the man in the family, the head of the family. So Clara had the skills, she had the talent, she fit in, and Tiffany could see something in her that he thought she had the right outlook for the job he wanted. So she went to work. She got the job, and she was going to go to work. And she had to go home first to start the next day, and she sat down and wrote a letter to her mother, which she did every single week, and told her all about it. Her mother was living in Ohio, a recent widow with 3 little other daughters at home, and Claire needed this job to send money home. And she was going to be paid for 5.5 days a week. She was going to be paid $5, not by the hour. That's the week. And she figured out she could send at least $2 home to her mother every week, because she lived in a little attic room up in a boarding house, and she didn't need much money. Her mother did. So she started working for Tiffany. And the work was working with glass pieces to fill out his mosaics. He was just starting to get into his Tiffany lamps in those days, and pictures, and that told stories, perhaps for church windows, perhaps for hangings in people's houses. He hired all these women because he figured they were easier to do these small-time jobs, using their fingers a lot and looking for the right colors, to go through these little pieces of glass and find the right ones that fit in. This was all done, about 30 women in a room at big, long tables. This was all done in a room with no air conditioning in the summer, not enough heat in the winter, dim lighting, and terrible air because it was always very stuffy in there. And these women, for sometimes mostly 10 hours a day, sat there and did their job. Clara was very good at it, and it wasn't long before she was raised, her pay was raised to $7.50 a week. And eventually, Clara was named in charge, the person in charge of this whole room. And Tiffany said, I'm going to make this a department. It's the women's glass and decorating company. That's your part in it. And Clara, you're in charge. And you're going to be making $9 an hour. Well, Clara was thrilled. Look at how much she could send her mother now. And every week during all of this process, she wrote her mother not just a note, like, hi, Mom, how are you? Here's your money. But she wrote these long, involved letters and described just what she was doing. And she made little drawings, perhaps, of the kinds of things she was working on. Week after week, she sent those letters. And now, as in charge of this whole department, Clara was really overwhelmed with work because she not only had all her work to do, she also had to hire and fire everyone. She had to train them. She had to keep track of their schedules and their pay. And also she was working with mostly 7 to 19 or 20-year-old women, many of them immigrants who couldn't speak the language, who had all kinds of problems. And she, as the older woman, now in her late 20s, was there as kind of a mother figure and ended up spending a lot of time helping them, getting them all trained, and then as soon as they got married, they couldn't work there anymore. So it was a very tough job she had. And some of it in later years created a little strain on her health, all those years of staring at those little pieces of glass and putting them in the right place. And also she began to look at Tiffany's work and say, oh, maybe if he did this, or I wonder if he'd like to do that. Clara ended up working for Tiffany for over 22 years. She took a little time off somewhere in there when she was about 40 to get married. But unfortunately, she married a man who was 30 years older than her, and he died suddenly after a year, so Tiffany couldn't wait to have her back because that department hadn't run it well since she had left. So she was there till she retired. Now, we could talk about Clara a whole lot more and tell more about her job, but the point of this story changes. We go ahead 108 years to Kent University, where they're doing research on women's work, factory work in the 1800s from people around the Ohio area. But they had lots of research material. One day, one of the men said, I just found a couple of these big boxes, and he gave it to one of the researchers. Thought maybe there's something there would help you. It says Louis Tiffany on the box, and letters. They didn't know what this was about. They opened the first box of letters, and it was like a file cabinet, starting with 1888. Every year, Clara's mother had kept those letters, saved every one. year after year after year after year, all those detailed letters with telling everything Clara was doing. And after her mother died, her sisters kept it up, just as Clara kept sending that money all of the time. And as they went through them, they made a great discovery. From Clara's letters, they could tell that she had been the designer for over 200 of Tiffany's pieces. They had been designed by Clara. Now, probably both she and Tiffany knew that she couldn't get credit for them because he was beginning to get known in the world now, and nobody wanted a Clara lamp. They wanted a Tiffany lamp. The word, just before Clara retired, word got out somehow that Tiffany was getting a lot of help from this helper. In fact, somebody even spread the word that Clara was making $10,000 a year, which would have been unheard of for a woman in those days. And it was a lie. It wasn't true, because when Clara retired, the last year she worked, her salary was $1,850. This is for a woman who had designed many of the lamps that were selling for $250 to $550 or $750. And the name Tiffany was just bursting forth. So Clara never got any recognition for this, but her letters proved it. And I guess what I think about this is that even today, the name Tiffany just gives us this feeling of, class and money and good taste and all those good things just when we see the word Tiffany. And I just think that somehow, even if it had to wait 108 years, somewhere, somehow, people should know that Clara Walcott was just as good as Tiffany. So,
Loved it.
that's a kind of a shortened version. But
No, that's
yeah.
fascinating.
fascinating story, I think, yeah.
Yeah. And I like the way you started with the interview and pointed out how studiously Tiffany went at the interview, and how much he probably had picked up from the initial observation of her. And the other thing that was wonderful, and again, I didn't know where it was going until very late in the day, but you always mentioned writing the letters, so we got that presence of the letters and the fact that they then would be discovered in such an organized way that you had this case study on Tiffany and Company. Incredible.
Mm-hmm. And the real I have a story on this also.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
the company records were burned.
That's right.
And were burned in
Big
a fire.
Big fire. Yeah.
So,
And there's a whole lot about Tiffany, too, that was in this article. He wasn't easy to work for.
I bet.
Yeah.
Have you been to Winter Park, Florida?
No.
Joe turned me on to that.
No.
Just outside of Orlando.
You have to go. It's
No, but I've been to that glass museum in New York State.
Corning.
Yeah, Corning. That's
the
Winter Park.
Winter Park was a winter place for a lot of the landed elite and stuff. And one of them was a guy named Morse, who was the Morse chain company and stuff. He was a good friend of Tiffany. Had some pieces in his houses here and in New York. And when the fire happened out at the Tiffany Manse on Long Island, Morse went up, and together he and Tiffany salvaged whatever they could of the glass that had been not burned. And he took it back to Winter Park, and he and his daughter, he was pretty old, created a foundation and organized this Tiffany Museum. And it's incredible. And
It's called Morse, but it's all Tiffany.
it's all
Well,
Tiffany.
almost all Tiffany.
All Tiffany. And it's coming from Saratoga, you'll love Winter Park because it's the closest place to Saratoga I've been, and charming place with a lot of art galleries, good restaurants. Rollins College is there. It's given the story, it's just outside Orlando, and it's just a charming place to.
It's a good idea for a trip.
Yeah, it's good.
We could do a whole program on
We could do a
the
whole
Tiffany
program,
girls
the Tiffany girls. We could do.
and work conditions at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, and when we went there, sometimes you can get a direct flight to Orlando.
Right.
And so my husband and I took like a 8 o'clock flight or something from Albany, and we had lunch in Winter Park.
In
It
Winter
was
Park, oh, wow, that's great.
It wasn't jet lag. It was like,
Are we really here?
Are we really here?
And the main street's got this park across the street that goes like 4 blocks with huge oak trees and Spanish moss. So if you're sitting at one of the outside restaurants, you're literally in this park, and it's incredible. Just it's almost as good as local at the lake.
Almost as good. Okay.
No, it's actually better.
Okay.
Even we went into the museum, found out when there was going to be a tour, figured out it was time we should get lunch. So the nearest thing was Panera, so we just went into a Panera and had a good Panera lunch. But it was still like, we're really here. Yeah, we really are. And so they had lots of. You got a real flavor of what the mansion was like, even though it was huge, like 87 rooms or something like that. So I found it very.
And it's a museum that you don't go through quickly.
And the chapel, there was a little chapel intact.
Yeah.
Yes.
Something.
And so he did all the interior. I don't know. So he was sort of like Frank Lloyd Wright. Minus, he didn't do the architecture. He didn't do the blueprints.
Right.
And all the engineering part of it, but all interior designer. That doesn't really encompass what we call interior design. That's the pink color in the curtains and the wall decoration. I mean, this was fountains. Everything.
And $700 lamps,
Yeah.
which now would cost thousands and thousands.
Yeah, I did a cost that they like $250,000 for original Tiffany lamps.
There are a couple of Tiffany windows that I could think of locally.
Yes.
There's one beautiful one with the valley scene in the First Church in Albany. It's just spectacular. And then there's several in a big wall of windows in the First Presbyterian Church in Troy and in the First Presbyterian Church in Albany. So that they're incredible when you see them. So.
And again, I think it's the First Presbyterian Church in Troy. That's sort of maybe 2 blocks from Troy Savings Bank Music Hall.
Right.
They did all the interior design there too.
Yeah.
Children at the Well had one of their performances there
It was just,
3-4 years ago. Yeah. And also some of them ones in the Russell Sage former chapel memorial, the big white building with columns.
Yeah, that's their Tiffany
on the grass plot. About half of those are Tiffany's.
Now, where did you discover the story?
Well, I had seen some Tiffany stuff before, and this magazine called Archives comes out 4 times a year. From I think we went down to the Albany Museum, New York State Museum, for some kind of a program, and I think that was that issue I picked up, and then I signed up for it and read that, and I couldn't get it out of my head. It was fascinating to me that they found this all, and this. Nobody cared. She didn't care that she didn't get recognized or didn't expect it, but
yes, and it was typical of the time.
It tells
that, like Rembrandt had minions that did a lot of the detail work.
Right.
But it was his name, so it wasn't. Tiffany wasn't putting women down, but what I found was, what was I just thinking? She did have a man working for her. Oh, I know what it was. The women's department started growing, And Tiffany's men, and they even started doing stained glass windows. Well,
Yeah.
the delicate little things that, But the stained glass windows, the men went out on strike.
Yes,
Oh.
I didn't. I left some of that out because I didn't know how long.
Yes.
And besides, you can't tell everything
Right,
in
right.
one story. I wanted to focus on her.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
Yeah,
they went out
yeah.
on strike.
and he defended the women, kept them.
He kept them.
Yeah.
But they were then only could do the lamps, and
Yeah,
they
yeah,
couldn't do
yeah.
the windows anymore. But what really killed me was the women could design, do the drawing, like the blueprints, and they had a selector of the glass. Somebody and the designer would color it in, and then there was one woman who would go into the warehouse. They had like 5,200 different sheets of glass to pick from. How they filed them, I have no idea.
Well, and that was another thing in this article too. One of her jobs, one of her duties when she became the head person of this group, was also counting all the pieces of glass at the end of the day.
Wow.
On the that each person had been using. I mean,
Yeah, okay, yeah. Some less artistic tasks.
Yeah.
And so there was the woman with the eye for the color, and then there was a cutter. So from this blueprint, they would have little shapes. Okay, and if it was going to be, a lot of them was made out of metal. And so the woman with the eye for color would put the metal down, and then the cutter would cut around it. The cutter knew how to do the cut around. And then it would be assembled on a mold. And then the women turned it over to men, because then you started using a soldering iron. And of course, a woman couldn't use a soldering iron. And it was like, at that time, the irons, you heated them on the stove. They were red hot. Well, just shy of red hot. And so you got this big, but a little soldering iron, they couldn't manage that. The woman's lib in me, the hackles.
I'm not gonna get in the middle of this. I'm just gonna sit here and smile and be
Yes.
nice. No.
Yes. So the story illuminates a time in women's history.
yes, yes, I think it does.
Illuminates with the glass,
Uh-huh.
with the lamps. So, yes, there's a whole wealth of that. Well, we only have 2 minutes left, guys.
Well, we have just one little reflection on this story, because there's a wonderful line about stories coming to you and finding you. And what you just described was how the story found you. And I couldn't get it out of my head, so I've told it. And at times when a story comes to you, you must care for it. And you've cared for it very well. And I would encourage you to think about story in that way. And if they come to you, we'll show up here on that night of our meeting and maybe share the story.
Indeed, that some stories, like Clara Wilcox,
Walcott.
is one of those people who made a difference, whose name we don't know, but your story has given her a voice, and all the 30 women that worked for her. That Tiffany had the idea of depicting nature. That was the theme of it. He didn't want to abstract too particular or anything. Dang, sorry. And then Clara did the actual many of the actual drawings.
You okay?
Sorry. End of a cold.
End of a cold. Summer can bring that.
It's time to say goodbye.
Thanks for visiting with us. Thank you, Betty Cassidy, for sharing
You're
your
welcome.
stories and your story. And we'll see you next month, and hope to see you around any one of the performances that we've been talking about through the course of the hour. Much good cheer.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, and I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.